right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the Commercial Contractor and Inspector Training. I'm Courtney Anderson with Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And this is our last training in the commercial series. So this is our fifth one in the commercial series. There's another residential one tomorrow. And these trainings were developed with our partners in community planning and development. And you know, people are still joining the meeting, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So if we can go to the translation slide, please. So this session is available in both English and Spanish. And to switch your windows, you're going to click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom window and choose either English or Spanish after Chessie says this in Spanish.
Esta sesión está disponible en inglés y español. Haga clic en el icono Interpretación en la parte inferior de la ventana de Zoom y elija inglés o español.
Again, welcome to today's presentation, which is our second for contractors and inspectors and lasts about an hour. I'm Linda Morrison and I lead the Energy Review Team for Community Planning and Development. Today, we're going to dig deeper into the prescriptive and performance paths. After our prepared material, we'll have a question and answer session. Please type questions at any time using the Zoom Q&A feature. We'll use the Zoom chat during the presentation to answer basic questions like where to find information and hold more complex questions until our session. During the session, the moderator will say the questions out loud so our community planning and development panel can respond. If we're unable to answer your question in our time together today, we'll answer it via email. So the schedule shows the presentations that we've done to date. There were two in the contractor inspector group, and previously we've done one about electrification, the prescriptive path, and the performance path. So please find the training sessions that were recorded and will be posted to our website. And continuing education credit is available for people who attend the full session. If you called in by phone instead of using a laptop and want credit, please email Tom Gleason, tom.gleason@denvergov.org so he gets your full information. We have a timeline we wanted to share, which helps to recap Denver's plans and goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The 2022 Denver Energy Code became effective on May 1st of this year, and it's a step in a series of steps that take us to our ultimate goal of zero greenhouse gas emissions. Energy efficiency is fundamental, but it alone does not achieve the goal. It takes a combination of efficiency, electrification, and a grid. So we all have a part to play to make these changes, and we also have time to accomplish them incrementally. The Energy Code includes input from a wide variety of community members and stakeholders, and so a big thank you to all who contributed. So you'll find the full 2022 Denver Energy Code at denvergov.org/building code. Our package of proposed changes has been approved. It was approved yesterday, the 20th. These updates were primarily housekeeping in nature, and the presentations have included them. Please do check back for the full code adoption being posted to the website and just website updates in general. Our Denver-specific ComCheck and ResCheck are anticipated to be available in fall of 2023. So on the Net Zero Energy Hub, you'll find additional resources that have presentations for specific provisions, compliance options, and additional trainings. More resources are being added, so be sure to check back here too. Wanted to tell you about some pilots for new building electrification. It's a win for pilots or for projects who are interested in pursuing electrification, whether that's buildings or homes, as it helps to fund a difference between an all-electric building and a typical mixed fuel building. In exchange for funding, the pilots agree to share information and be a case study so we can showcase the story of the project, get some lessons learned, and other projects in the community can look to your project as an example. At least 50% of the pilots will be an equity priority building, and applications are still open. So tips for referencing the code. You'll hear us use a single reference to a code section as the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This is because the 2022 Denver Building and Fire Code adopts the base code as a reference. So it's a good practice to check Denver's code first to see if there are deletions or modifications to a section, then reference the base code. So let's jump in to today's presentation. Tom Gleason with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency is our moderator, and Kevin Perry with NORESCO is our presenter.
Thanks, Linda. I will just turn on my video here briefly so you all know I am a real human and you can see who I am. But today we'll be going over the 2022 Denver Energy Code requirements, how to set your team up for success. And I mean success as in being able to have confidence that your project can meet the code, and an overview of the prescriptive and performance pathways. Remember, this is the second part of the contractor training. Part 1 was last week. If you missed it, you can find a recording online. And now I'll turn my video off so it's not distracting. So let's jump right in to the 2022 Denver Energy Code Requirements Overview. Let's take a moment to review how Denver defines commercial buildings. On the screen, you will see the definition written out for residential buildings. You might be asking, why are we talking about residential definitions when this is a presentation on commercial projects? Well, that's because the definition for residential buildings has less caveats than commercial buildings. I look at it this way. If you know what is classified as a residential building, then everything else is considered a commercial building. So I'll just read the definition real quick. Residential buildings are detached 1- and 2-family dwelling units in multiple single-family dwellings, and group R3 and R4 buildings, 3 stories or less in height. I also want to point out that the code doesn't just apply to new construction. Any building undergoing an alteration, remodel, repair, change of use, or change of occupancy, especially if it results in higher energy use, the code applies to. A new definition added to the 2022 Denver Energy Code is a definition of an all-electric property. This was added to help people start to understand how Denver is defining an all-electric property. If you haven't heard, the code is swinging towards this, so I think it would be important for you to know and understand what this is. An all-electric property means you can't have any equipment or appliances that use gas. There are exceptions for emergency power systems and standby power systems like generators. It seems pretty straightforward for water heaters, stoves, or air handling units, but what about for amenity spaces? There are a lot of commercial buildings that have, say, a fire pit feature or a grill that is connected to a natural gas line. We can't forget about those spaces as well because they would not meet the definition of an all-electric property due to them being permanently installed. There are a lot of different requirements you might have been hearing about, like the Denver Green Building Ordinance, the Denver Green Code, the Energized Denver Ordinance. With all these names, I know it can get confusing on what you're supposed to follow, let alone which one takes precedent over the other. Well, I have good news for you. Denver has worked super hard to make sure that these changes that they made to the Denver Green Code incorporates all these items from the different codes and ordinances. So now it comes down to 2 different pathways. the prescriptive pathway, or the performance pathway. No matter what pathway your project chooses, there will be some requirements, some minimum requirements that you'll have to comply with. These minimum requirements are not all the same between pathways. Some of these include commissioning and air leakage testing. There's also a checklist where teams will report their 2030 EUI targets for the Energized Denver Ordinance. The Denver Green Building Ordinance doesn't apply to all projects. By this time, you should already know about the options within the Denver Green Building Ordinance from previous code cycles. They're also shown here on the slide for your reference. So if your project requires you to follow the Denver Green Building Ordinance, the 2023 updates to the rules and regs now give you some more options. Typically, these new options are done with following the performance pathway. That's because these options deal with the percentage of energy savings beyond code, and this is proven by doing energy modeling. Two new options to meet the Denver Green Building Ordinance is the ability to show your project is saving an extra 12% in energy usage, or you can choose to be an all-electric property and show that your project saved an extra 5% in energy. If you're not familiar with the Denver Green Building Ordinance or just need a refresher, the website on the slide will take you where you can learn more. Remember, we talked about a few slides back about minimum requirements. This slide deals with these minimum requirements. Denver calls them limited mandatory use. Denver knows there isn't a one-size-fits-all when it comes to codes and commercial projects. So they created a point system to meet these minimum requirements. Point system was designed so that teams can choose options that are cost-effective and fit well with their project's goals while keeping Denver on track for their own energy and carbon reduction goals. Projects will choose a certain number of credits from each category. Just a reminder, all new commercial, construction, or major renovation projects must comply with this table no matter which pathway the project follows. You might be asking, what is considered a major renovation? Well, Denver existing building code breaks this down into three categories. A level 3 alteration, a 100,000 square foot or greater addition, or an addition that is 50% or more to the existing gross square foot floor area. If you want, the link on the screen will take you to a web page where you can learn more. Setting the project up for success. Complying with the energy code requires thinking about the project as a whole from the beginning of the design. For instance, window U value and solar heat gain coefficient impacts mechanical equipment capacity and efficiency. This is true whether the project is using a prescriptive pathway or a performance pathway. Through the design process, the design team must weigh options to meet these energy code requirements. During the design process, the team should look at how to reduce the load of the building. That's probably the number one thing or baseline that sets a building up for being able to meet the energy code. They can look at optimizing the building envelope from a leakage standpoint, glazing standpoint, and even a power and lighting standpoint. From there, they will look at sizing the mechanical equipment, and evaluating renewable options needed. Depending on the project delivery method, whether that be CMGC or design build, whatever you might have, you may or may not be part of that design process. However, you will be part of the construction process. And now you must follow these measures, and even verify that the building is performing per this design. I know this can be stressful, especially if some of these things you've never done before. So what if you can't build to the construction documents? Maybe this is due to supply chain issues or a value engineering task, also known as VE. These are very real scenarios. If you find that your project is in this situation, an RFI or addendum will probably be used or issued. And that's okay. To be successful at meeting the energy code in this scenario, the team needs to do a full evaluation of that RFI or addendum, so there are no surprises. The last thing you want is your project to get held up at the very end due to a construction change that ended up changing how the building is using energy. This is very important. Deviating from the permit documents may require the team to submit the updated drawings, some updated compliance documents, or an updated energy model. These updated documents will need to be reviewed by the city and county to make sure the project still meets the pathway selected. The pre-construction meeting is a requirement. The parties involved will be at a minimum the inspector and general contractor. It might be helpful, though, to invite some of the other team members as well, like the PMs, the air barrier consultants, or other design team members. The Denver inspection team will reach out proactively to schedule this energy pre-construction meeting for projects. Projects greater than 25,000 square feet will have an additional energy-focused pre-construction meeting. The agenda for these meetings will be tailored based on the unique requirements for that project. Some agenda items include identifying the compliance pathway, then using the 2022 Denver Energy Code checklist and the permit set to have an in-depth discussion. Here's an example of the Denver Energy Code checklist. These checklists have things like general compliance and specifics from all the chapters listed within the Denver Energy Code. This means each discipline like HVAC, power and lighting, and envelope all will have checklists. You can see this system is to help the design and construction team know if they are meeting the requirements. And it also helps streamline the process for the city and county reviewers and inspectors, as this calls out where things are located. The team will see what pathway is selected, and the inspector will be able to see a modified list of compliance options selected by the project team. This was designed to help get everyone on the same page. Here's another example of the checklist. This shows that the property is all electric. The inspector might not have access to all those details, but now he or she knows from a higher level what to expect when they are doing their reviews or inspections. This can especially be helpful for them in the field. Depending on what options your project ends up choosing, some of these options are based on actual performance and not just what is documented on the plans. When this happens, the City and County of Denver reviewers will flag these items so that the inspectors know what to look for at a later date. Some examples are on this slide. Let's go through one of those. Your project chooses to follow the prescriptive pathway and wanted to get reduced air infiltration points. Documentation of air leakage testing must be provided, showing that the project meets the requirement before you can get a CO, a certificate of occupancy. Also, something worth pointing out, renewable energy must be installed in order to get a certificate of occupancy. You can still get a temporary certificate of occupancy in the meantime, but not a permanent certificate of occupancy. The next few slides, we will review the prescriptive path requirements specifically as they apply to contractors and inspectors. You can also check out a separate training on the prescriptive compliance path on Denver's website. If the project is following the prescriptive pathway, you will need to follow section C406. This section has now moved to a point-based system. Before, it was picking one option from a list of like 8 items. The newest energy code moved to this point-based system and required 10 points from their table. To keep in line with the City and County of Denver goals, they started with that same point system and then evaluated each section to see how much it would impact building energy usage. From there, they then modified how many points would be required based on the building type, and that's how we get to the table. The amount of credits a project must comply with is dependent on the building type and whether it is all electric or not. You'll notice the points for an all electric building is significantly lower. This is to incentivize electrification. Let's talk about tenant spaces since they're a little bit different there. Those spaces need 10 credits from the lighting and HVAC options within this section. This is a little higher than the 2021 IECC requirements of 5 credits. Again, this was heavily evaluated by the team to ensure it was fair and keeps Denver on track for their goals. A reminder here, if your project is following the performance section, or performance pathway, I should say, this section does not apply to it. The next couple of slides, we'll be going to look at individual sections to see how you can start to add up the number of credits your project needs. Envelope credits are available when using more efficient building OPEC assemblies and fenestration assemblies. If your project uses the alternate calculation approach for showing a reduced UA, there are points for that. However, it should be noted that when using this approach, the Denver Energy Code now places limits on the maximum U factor for roofs, walls, and interior floor assemblies. This is important because if issues come up during construction, you will need to make sure any changes are evaluated with the team to ensure the project is still able to get correct amount of points for the section. Air leakage testing is required for all buildings no matter what. There are points for projects that have reduced air leakage rates. Remember that if your project is going after the reduced air leakage points, the inspector will be flagged to make sure that a report showing these rates have been provided to the city and county before a certificate of occupancy is issued. Overall, for the envelope portion of section C406, the contractors and inspectors will want to pay particular attention to the envelope backstop requirements, any CommCheck inspection checklist, and air leakage testing results. These are all important items when it comes to successfully meeting the code and will affect the project if they are just changed during construction. Now let's move on to the HVAC section within 406 as it relates to points. The If you're familiar with the past code, you know economizers are not a new requirement. However, there are some new updates to them. You'll see the requirements for chilled water system economizers have not changed. What has changed is the individual fan systems. What triggers that is the need for an economizer, is the cooling capacity for non-R group projects. If your cooling capacity is greater than 33,000 BTUH, then you'll need an economizer for that. And if your project feels strongly about not utilizing economizers, that's fine too. They can try to comply using the performance pathway instead of this prescriptive pathway. The Denver Energy Code has energy recovery requirements for a broad range of commercial buildings. These requirements are more stringent for systems that operate continuously. That is, and continuously is more than 8,000 hours per year. For systems that operate on a daytime schedule, such as an office or retail buildings, the requirement varies with the outside air requirement. Energy recovery systems must meet minimum efficiency requirements. New updates for this section include enthalpy recovery ratio of at least 60%. Note that some systems must also have a bypass or some sort of controls to reduce that pressure drop within the system when free cooling is available. Here's a look at the credits for your project that could be obtained for the HVAC category within Section 406. Energy efficiency credits are available for improved cooling efficiency and heating efficiency. With higher performing heating and cooling equipment above code, your project will be able to obtain higher points. For now, these thresholds are at 5% and the 10% level. If your heating is 15% better than code, you can't double dip the 5% points and the 10% points. You only get the higher of the two. Credits are also available for dedicated outdoor air systems. Fault detection and diagnostics became a requirement earlier in an earlier code cycle, but there are exceptions for when this is required. So if your project meets one of those exceptions for not needing fault detection, then that credit becomes selectable for your project. Otherwise, you can't take credit for something that is already required. I also want to note here that efficient commercial kitchen equipment is eligible for energy efficient credits or points, but we're not going to go over them in this presentation. Continuing with the HVAC section, energy credits are offered for all electric space heating. However, they cannot be claimed for an all-electric property. You see a theme here? You can't actually, you actually have to go above and beyond and not just take credit for something you're already doing. Cold climate heat pumps, demand response thermostats, and reduced fan power are also areas within the HVAC section within 406 where the team can obtain credits. Wrapping up the HVAC section within 406, it's important to know that all different areas that projects can obtain points from. These can affect contractors and inspectors and could limit VE options. The ones specific to the Denver Energy Code are fault detection, cold climate heat pumps, and demand response thermostats. These other options that we've talked about are listed in the baseline of the 2021 IECC. Don't forget that these systems need to be commissioned. This means they will need to be checked by a third party that they actually exist and are operating correctly. Let's now move on to service water heating credits. Buildings with significant service water heating loads are eligible for credits for recovered/renewable energy systems, efficient fossil fuel systems, and heat pumps. Once again, all electric water heating cannot be claimed for an all electric property. Just like the other credits, we want to make sure that the project team knows what credits the project is going to go after in case of changes in the field or value engineering tasks. For more information on all these options, I encourage you to check out the prescriptive path training on Denver's website. Let's move on to the service water heating credits. About that. I meant the power and lighting credits. This is the last section that we're going to go over for point systems within section C406. This section, there's a big opportunity for some major points. In the past, C406 options where you only had to pick one or two things to comply with it. The lighting section is what most projects chose to do to meet that section. I kind of feel that these things are still in line with that, and a lot of projects will use this section to gain a big portion of their points. As you can see, energy efficient lighting systems can provide a significant amount of required credits, particularly retail or mercantile occupancy groups. In order to claim credit for reduced lighting power, you need an internal lighting power reduction of at least 10%. Additional credit can be achieved for lighting power reductions greater than 15%. It's also worth pointing out that for this section only, proportional credits can be received if you go above and beyond the percentage listed within the table. Enhanced digital lighting control is a credit available to all occupancy groups except residential multifamily buildings. This credit requires advanced capabilities, including continuous dimming and load shedding capabilities, as well as individually addressable luminaires. This is also known as luminaire level lighting controls, or LLLC. If you haven't heard of this system, I would recommend looking further into them. These systems have a great savings opportunity and potential by enabling control of individual or small groups of luminaires to dim or shut off in response to occupancy or daylight levels or any other factors. The red box is to draw your attention to the credits, which will require verification beyond just what's on the drawings. These renewable credits will require actual installation and documentation prior to getting your CO. Here are the key items for power and lighting section within 406 for contractors and inspectors. The checklist, electric ready requirements, electric vehicle requirements, commissioning of the lighting control system, and if the project is targeting any efficiency credits for lighting controls or renewable energy. Let's now move on to the performance pathway. You can also check out the separate training on performance path compliance on Denver's website. We talked about the prescriptive pathway up to this point. The other pathway a project can choose is the performance pathway. This performance pathway is done by some sort of energy modeling. Once the team begins the energy modeling process, they can then evaluate which performance pathway is best fit for the project. Denver has amended section 407, C407, also known as the performance pathway, from the IECC, and has also added 2 more performance pathways. Projects have the options now to comply via the energy cost savings using section 407, also known as the energy cost, or by the site energy savings using appendix SE, or by designing a fixed energy performance target using Appendix PT. Since Section 407 and Appendix SE use the exact same reference baseline, it'll be easy for your energy modeler to evaluate all three methods without any extra modeling effort. So in short, there are actually three different modeling pathways the team can choose to go down. The overall benefits of using one of the performance pathways is that the modeling encourages a holistic design process and allows for more flexibility within the elements within the energy code. It also will help you evaluate your design relative to Denver's net zero energy goals, and also plan for compliance with the Denver Green Building Ordinance. Just like the prescriptive pathway, there are mandatory requirements within the performance pathways. Projects using the performance path must follow mandatory provisions of ASHRAE, as well as those of the Denver Energy Code. Common question we've been hearing is, why do we need to follow ASHRAE 90.1 mandatory requirements if we aren't using the ASHRAE path to demonstrate compliance? Well, the reason for that is the Denver Energy Code performance pathway uses the ASHRAE 90.1 modeling protocol. To make that compliance valid, we have to follow those requirements. So since those are new to a lot of the teams, make sure to start your checklist for your performance projects early on so you can get ahead of it. Fortunately, the ASHRAE requirements are very similar to the IECC standard requirements. The next few slides will identify the differences in the mandatory requirements between the prescriptive and performance pathway specific to ASHRAE 90.1 requirements. This is not a comprehensive list of the differences, but you can use the performance checklist to help identify those differences. Let's start with the envelope. The envelope's pretty easy. There's very little differences, as you can see. We will use ASHRAE Appendix G for the baselines, and then we will add the option for semi-heated spaces category. Other than that, the envelope follows the standard Denver Energy Code. In the HVAC section, you will see many of the ASHRAE requirements are identical to IECC. The items under the 2022 Denver Energy Code on the left are the minimum requirements the project is required to do, even if following the ASHRAE 90.1 pathway. The items on the right are mandatory requirements the project has to meet if following the 90.1 pathway. The idea here is to show you that even though it looks like a lot of additional requirements to meet if following ASHRAE, they do line up very close to the Denver Energy Code and IECC. HVAC control requirements have some slight differences, so teams will want to review those specific sections on that. Duct testing is required for ducts operating at 3 inches of static or greater. ASHRAE has that also, but then adds testing for outdoor duct work to that as well. Remember, testing does create a flag for the inspector. Also note, there are separate presentations that cover the electrification provisions in detail, and those are posted to the Denver Gov Energy Code website. Surface water heating has a lot of similarities as well. There are slight differences in pool control and cover requirements, namely that ASHRAE requires covers for both indoor and outdoor pools, where the prescriptive path only requires them for outdoor pools. The pressure booster requirements are also specific just to ASHRAE. And also noted here that the items on the left are required no matter what pathway. And if you want to hear more about them, there's a separate presentation covered the electrical provisions that we just said in the last slide. Here's the power and lighting section. EV spaces, solar ready requirements, electrical infrastructure on the left are still required. On the right, there are some differences. There are a handful of lighting control differences, such as how daylight zones are defined and how exterior lights should be turned on and off. Something unique to ASHRAE is that dwelling units do not require dimming like they do under the IECC. So if you're following the ASHRAE path, teams only need to follow the minimum efficacy requirements. There are also some very slight differences between the IECC and ASHRAE energy monitoring requirements. Both will still apply. And if they are conflicts, you'll use the more stringent of the two. On-site renewable energy can be used to meet the performance path requirements. Up to 10% of the proposed energy cost or energy use. It will require the team to provide and evaluate a few more in-depth details. The team will need to use a software to show what the energy production would be of the PV array. Also, there are some limits on the leasing/contracting of the renewable systems. If it either has to be owned outright or leased or contracted for at least 15 years. Just so you know that if your project is following an energy modeling pathway, they'll have to provide some reporting. There are two parts using two different Excel workbooks. They're here on the screen. The first part is 90.1 compliance form, where the basic ASHRAE 90.1 information is entered. The second part is the Denver Energy Code companion tool. Just know there is an export function that gets the model information over to this form. And then this form looks at the compliance with the Denver Energy Code and the Green Building Ordinance energy options. Both of these files are required for the submittal process. So let's summarize what we learned today. Requirements for the pathways. No matter what pathway your project chooses, there are requirements for your project, and the project must meet these. These are those sections. Commissioning and verification is required. Here are some of the systems that need to be commissioned or verified, depending on your pathway. These items need further verification than just being listed on the drawings. Most of the time, this will require some sort of third-party verification or subcontractor verification. So what if things change during construction? Just remember, whenever possible, build to the construction documents. If field alterations happen, that's just the nature of our business. We need to make sure that they don't happen in isolation, especially if it relates to equipment on the energy efficiency credits or the energy performance of the building. That happens, we need to work with the design team to evaluate these potential changes. Then we also need to submit modified drawings with compliance documentation like ComCheck or other supplemental information or an energy model report. This way, there are no surprises. Something's changed from the permit set or the drawings are modified, the inspectors will make the call on the next steps. This is a summary of things that will get you a temporary certificate of occupancy, but not a CO. Also note that it's not listed any change to what we just discussed, any change to the design documents without proper documentation sent in will get you a TCO and not a CO. Denver has an electrification program for existing buildings. If you want any additional resources on these Denver electrification programs, go ahead and check out that website listed on the screen. There you can find more information on code changes, electrification feasibility reports, equipment rebates, and a whole bunch more stuff. So I ask you, do you have an existing building that is going through an electrification process? Passer wants to hear and how things are going. Feel free to send them an email. And with that, I'll turn it over for questions.
Awesome presentation, Kevin. Thank you very much. So now we are going to shift into the Q&A portion of our webinar. So if folks want to use the Q&A button, ask any and all questions you have. So we have staff here from the Community Planning and Development Office, as well as our wonderful presenter, Kevin Perry, and staff from our Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. So we want to make sure you do not leave with any questions today. So I have a couple questions I'm going to get us started with, and then folks, feel free to drop any questions you have specific to your work or your projects into that Q&A function. And with the first question, I'm going to hope that Linda Morrison can help me with this one. Linda, can you describe the difference between the Denver Energy Code and the Denver Green Code?
Sure, and maybe Kevin, you can walk up the presentation up to that slide with the limited mandatory use for the Green Code. I think that would be helpful. And so interestingly enough, they come to us in two different separate code documents. So the one document is the Denver Building and Fire Code. On our website, that is one collected document that references our building code, the IMC, that energy code, fire code, all those documents together, and separately the Green Code lives. So it is related to that energy code through Chapter 7, the commercial energy chapter, but the Green Code looks at really sustainability as a topic in a holistic manner. So it picks up things like water use, site sustainability, materials and resources. So it's kind of more holistic in nature. And this is the first cycle where the Denver Green Code comes to projects as a requirement. It's limited in nature, so it's not a hurdle. It's really meant to get familiar, for project teams to get familiar with the code itself and then implementing it.
And Linda, if I understand correctly, the Denver Green Code has a lot of parallels with LEED. So if projects are already pursuing a LEED certification for their project, would they expect to see some overlap or synergies between the two?
It certainly will seem familiar to that with sites and water, indoor environmental quality, materials and resources. Those are similar chapters, and it's also similar to ASHRAE 189.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, next question. How do tenant spaces use the prescriptive path?
Okay, so Kevin, maybe you can walk over to the first slide that we have with C406 and the credits showing there. So if you have a tenant space, so a previously non-occupied tenant space, you're going to do the prescriptive path. The vast majority of tenant spaces will use the prescriptive path for compliance. You need to earn 10 credits through all the different options for credits. You could also lean on the building that you are part of if the whole building has already accounted for your tenant space, either in the prescriptive or the performance path, and that would demonstrate compliance.
And a follow-up question on the prescriptive path. For that path, when can points be awarded if pursuing reduced air infiltration credits?
Let's see, Kevin, if you could just move. Yeah, and there we go. So the reduced air infiltration. So generally speaking, we're at 0.4 CFM per square foot for the required air leakage testing for general commercial buildings. And once a design team commits to reduced air infiltration, we've found that really significant reductions in air leakage are possible. So you go a little ways down the road and you're able to achieve quite a bit. So there's two thresholds. There's either the 0.25 CFM per square foot or the 0.15 CFM per square foot thresholds for awarding points. Those are both tested at 75 pascals. And you can see the different credits that are awarded for the different group occupancies there.
Okay. And another question I see here is, what percentage of renewables are allowed to be used for the performance path?
Great. So I think we have a slide on that. If you can walk over to that, Kevin, it's towards the end. So renewables can be used for the performance path that are on site. They can come through, they can be owned by the project. They can also come through a lease or a contract, and up to 10% of the energy of the building can be supplied by renewables. So the base IECC 2021 allows for 5%. Denver wants to allow more than that for code compliance, so 10% would be great.
Oh man, forgot to unmute. Okay, and so I think I'm not seeing too many more questions, so I'll just remind participants one last time, if you have questions for us, please let us know. Okay, I'm not seeing additional questions. So if there's anything we missed, I think we'll follow up with folks offline. So this is our final webinar in the commercial series. We have a residential contractor energy code considerations, part 1 tomorrow, and then part 2 the following week. And that will be the end of our 10-part series. So we're really thankful for everyone who has joined us for this webinar series. Again, all of this content will be posted on our website. We are working on that right now. We just have to do a little scrubbing of the videos before we can get them up. But we are going to get those and put them on the denvergov.org/energy code website. Additionally, we'll be following up offline with folks with AIA and AIA continuing education credit, as well as certificates of completion. So if you haven't gotten those yet, just hang tight. They will be coming. Everyone will be emailed when we have our content posted. And if you don't see something in the next week or so, feel free to shoot me an email, but otherwise know that that is coming soon. And with that, I think I'm going to close this out. So thanks everyone for being here, and take care.